Hello and welcome to a new edition of PhRMA Talks. Today we're going to be talking about how the government pays for innovation and how big pharma profits. But before we get into that, I'd like to remind you to follow our podcast, hit like, subscribe, and hit the little bell for notifications. Hello and welcome to another edition of PhRMA Talks. My name is Alex Hernandez. Alongside me as always is Dr. Craig Stern. And our topic for today, we're going to talk about how the government innovates and how big pharma profits. So before we get into that, I'd like to make reference to why this topic came up. And showed me a video. It's from a group called Now This. They talked about, in a simplified version, government gives money, or government takes taxpayer money and gives it to NIH researchers, and they find innovations for new drugs, and big pharma buys those new drugs and packages it and prices it as they will. So that's the simplified version, but we brought Dr. Stern here to kind of clarify some of those empty spaces that are not being filled in from what this video is showing us. First off, have you seen the video?
I did. It had to deal with some congressmen that were questioning experts about what goes on with the ultimate issues you've indicated, Alex, and that is that government spends taxpayer money to develop drugs, then pharma comes in, takes those drugs and builds them and then charges huge prices to people. So on the surface, it's a big problem, and there's no question. Nobody's going to sit and argue about the fact that that occurs and that it's not the right way to do it, etc. But yes, that's what they show.
So let's get into it. Let's talk about what the issue is here. So what is the issue?
Well, the fundamental issue that we have is that government, through National Institute of Health grants, provides money for investigators to find new drugs.
Okay.
So what's going on here is that the United States government, and by the way, other governments across the world do exactly the same thing.
Of course.
The idea is that government provides money to innovate, the ultimate goal being that people benefit from whatever the benefits of the innovation are, in this case drugs, and also then people are helped. Hopefully their quality of life is improved. Hopefully issues with regard to maybe cures or better treatments for what they have are improved. That's
kind
the
of like
ultimate big goal.
vaccinations, right?
Kind of like vaccinations. It's the kind of the big picture goal of what goes on.
Right.
Yeah.
So through this type of process, you get like penicillin. Before penicillin became a big thing and became on the market, it was something the people needed, and government funded the research, and people benefited.
And similarly, the polio vaccine was created in order to stop the scourge of polio crossing vaccines, as you've indicated. And then, of course, many other drugs, some of whom are treatments, some of whom are cures.
Okay, so moving on. What's the next part of this?
Well, the next part of this is that pharma or pharmaceutical manufacturers takes these findings and builds new drugs. So that's true. There's a lot of complications to it that we'll talk about it, but bottom line is that either the NIH researchers that may be in hospitals, maybe in universities, maybe in specialty kind of clinics, etc., they get this therapy, they build the concept. Sometimes they build the concept but not the new drug. Other times they find the new drug, and then the new drug is there available for someone to take and build on it and address it. I certainly was involved in it in clinics years ago with regard to high blood pressure, etc. And so investigators do this on a regular basis and hopefully come up with new things that are better than what we have today.
Right, and just for clarification purposes, when he mentions pharmaceutical manufacturers, and then when you hear on the news big pharma, they're both one and the same, right?
They are.
I mean, this whole big pharma thing is like an attention grabber. It's like Donald Trump speaking to you all the time. It's just words out there. They're pharmaceutical manufacturers, and
well, the other part of this is that they build the drug, Now, the bottom line and what was brought up in this video that Em came up with is that taxpayers don't benefit from the innovation, and the implication is, but they pay higher prices for the drugs. And the comment was made, and it's a true statement.
Oh, well, let me just backtrack a little bit. When you also mentioned that the innovation the researchers found in these institutes, either hospitals or universities and so on and so forth, what they find is the compound or the actual ingredients for the drug. It's not necessarily a drug built already.
That's right. It's not the tablet or capsule.
I think that's a big clarification for the people at home that don't necessarily understand the process. They think the drug is already made and then bought and then distributed.
Yeah, no,
it's not
no,
exactly
no, no.
how it works.
No. In fact, it frequently isn't even in a tablet form or an injectable form or others.
Right.
It's still in a research form. It requires a lot of
Testing
development,
and
testing to make sure that it's sterile, that it has the right strength, that it has all of the right components, that you don't have a component in it that is allergic and things like that. So no, it's not a finished product.
Right. It's still essentially an idea.
That's correct.
Yeah. So and then you mentioned the taxpayers don't benefit from the innovation but pay high prices for the drugs.
Right. The implication, and it's not wrong. I mean, we're not trying to create some sort of division. We're just trying to kind of put more information around this so that people understand it.
Yeah.
Is that yes, taxpayer money was used by researchers in order to develop these drugs and to develop the innovation, the concepts for it, etc. That's true. Taxpayers directly do not benefit that they get $1 for every dollar that the federal government spends. That doesn't happen, right? And the people that were talking were right in that generally governments do not get a benefit when they put their money there. They feel that it's an important part of government. It's an important part of government to give money to help innovate, to improve the overall care of the population, but necessarily they don't see that you got an innovation and therefore they're going to share dollar for dollar about whatever was spent. That's not common.
Right. Is there because I know there's no real solution to that problem as far as government getting kickback for these innovations, but could they come in the form of taxes or?
Well, sure. Governments give tax incentives. So they lower the tax rate in order for companies to be able to develop new product.
Right.
That may have come from an NIH researcher. It may just have come because they want a product to be developed. The shortage of drugs that's going on today, that's a very big deal for hospitals and others where drugs aren't available. There are tax incentives that are made available in order to stimulate these companies to go and make these drugs that may already exist. They're already in a bottle. There's something they can use.
They're just not manufactured.
But they're not manufactured, so they're giving it. So tax benefits are one. Another one is that money goes to universities, goes to research hospitals, certainly research clinics, etc. And that money then is used to develop new innovations, and whatever comes out of it, the universities or the hospitals may write a deal with the manufacturer where they share in the profits of it, and then that money comes back to the university or the hospital in order for them to fund more research.
Right. So, that's interesting. And then that money stops there. It doesn't keep going back to.
It does not go back to that. This is not an altruistic argument. We're not trying to argue one side or the other.
But it's clear.
But that's what happens.
But for clarity purposes, because this video brought up an argument, and that initial argument is that the government doesn't see that money back.
Right. And the other point here that's important is that there are safe harbors for physicians and pharmacists who participate in these studies, so that if you're participating, say I'm an investigator, which I was, and I participated in the study, there are safe harbors that do not penalize me because I used money in research money in order to develop something new. I was kept out of it. And
Right.
so any money and money flow, certainly no money ever came to me about it. There were studies that did come to me because the university or the hospital or the VA had money that I was given in order to do research studies.
Right.
But either way, there is what's known as safe harbors that protects doctors, pharmacists, nurses, and otherwise, so that they're kept out of it, but particularly doctors and pharmacists, so that they're not part of what the revenue stream is,
Right.
and they're not held captive over how much money they've spent in doing it.
So you should feel pretty good about that. I mean, I know you were a little sour about not getting that money, but I mean, at least you were kept away from any nefarious acts. No, I'm joking, of course. Okay, so we've made the argument. We've showed the issues from top to bottom initially. I mean, we left the customers out of it, but the argument here is from the government money down to the manufacturers buying the drug. So what are the big pharma issues here?
Well, the big pharma issue that they come up with is that developing a new product is costly. So even though a researcher may come up with the innovation, may come up with the idea for the product, or even some sort of a sample of what it's supposed to be,
Right.
then it becomes very costly. It has to be put through multiple testing. The drug itself has to be formulated. They have to ensure that it is appropriately sterile, appropriately ensured that it isn't increasing any other problems by adding certain adjuvants into the drug itself.
Right.
And then there's a host of issues with testing it in humans, in multiple FDA testing requirements for safety, for effectiveness, and then for even post-marketing surveillance, and then, of course, marketing and development. So no one is saying, oh, poor pharmaceutical company for doing it, but they are saying that there are a lot of costs involved. And the other part of it that pharma continually brings up is that the cost of the drug is part of the ones that were successful, but also includes all of the ones that were not successful.
Right.
So it includes the cost of failures as well. That's their argument.
Right, and it makes sense on the surface, and of course you've already mentioned this, that nobody's going to say poor big pharma, right? So how can the people understand what big pharma has to actually pay for and have to actually go through? Because nobody knows how. You can say something is costly, but no one knows how much it really costs.
No, and you're absolutely right, Alex, and nobody really knows. I mean, it's a very non-transparent system. Research leads to many failures. I mean, this is science. You do it many times. There are many failures until you get a success. That's fundamental.
You learned that in the 6th grade.
Hopefully.
At least most people in
Hopefully.
6th grade science learned that. Yeah.
But you also see the companies then say, well, then I should be protected. I should have a patent monopoly for that product, because now that I've gone through all those failures and I've gotten the benefit, now I should have a patent that will protect me, so that whatever product I've built, I've developed, I've tested, I've marketed, etc., will give me the ability to reclaim
It protects your investment.
whatever the investment is. That's part of their argument as well. And then finally is marketing is costly, because you've got to get to over 900,000 physicians in the United States. You have to get to over 300,000 pharmacists in the United States, over 60,000 retail pharmacies in the United States. So at the end of the day, you have to develop this out. Now, is it all well spent? Are they doing it in a way that is telling people about the disease and the best parts of it, what the options are? I'm not arguing that right now. There are multiple problems.
That's a whole other topic.
That's a whole other.
I would like to get into that, because marketing with a lot of these, especially the brand name manufacturers and some of these doctors' offices, you'd be surprised. I mean, and it's not that it's a terrible thing, really. I mean, on its surface, you look at advertising across since, I don't know, the early 1920s when they started with radio broadcasting. I mean, some of these advertising is just to grab you.
Yes, it is.
And
yes, it is.
it's not necessarily a bad thing. You got a product, you want to sell it, right?
Well, there's only 2 countries in the world that allow advertising of drugs in general media.
Right.
The United States is one of those, and the cost of drugs and the availability of drugs has gone up dramatically as the advertising has continued. So there's a whole argument about whether you should allow advertising, whether you shouldn't allow advertising, whether you focus it on disease and benefit,
Right.
or whether you focus it on just promoting that this drug is the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Well, whether or not it's right, whether or not you're advertising correctly or advertising incorrectly, it's costly. Marketing is very costly.
It is.
So at the end of the day, we got to remember who actually benefits from all this.
Yeah, the first thing is that it's rare for countries, whether directly or indirectly, to participate in the profits of a new drug. They certainly give money. That money, as you've indicated, as I've been talking about, leads to the concept, leads to a sample of it, doesn't lead to the tablet in the bottle that someone is going to take off a shelf, put a label on, and hand to you. Right. It doesn't lead to that, but it most definitely leads to the others. And by the way, this is not trying to promote one version or another. All we're trying to do is to talk about what all this means.
Right.
The second point is that some people do profit. Universities profit from these new drugs.
Okay.
Universities do, and so do hospitals. The Veterans Administration participates to some degree. In some degree, government, like the VA and others, participates because they get lower prices due to drugs that they've investigated, and therefore that they're getting better prices on. But that's only part of the story.
Right.
And then finally is countries provide tax incentives, and that is to help the drug industry to develop cheaper alternatives.
Right.
So there are gives and takes in the process. It is not perfect. This whole process is not transparent. It is overly complicated, and it works, but it's not something that you can take a sledgehammer to and
just
kill
stop it. Yeah.
Because then all of a sudden the tentacles go in multiple directions, and then you begin to influence what goes on. I'll give you a perfect example. When the USSR, Russia broke up from a centralized government into multiple different governments, we knew we were part of it. We were helping design what happened in many of these other countries.
Right.
Well, what happened was they used to be able to get, for example, drugs coming from one central location and going to their country, like Uzbekistan or Tajikistan or whatever. What happened was that stopped. So now all of a sudden they didn't have it. Now they had to go to black market in order to try and find the drug. So we're not advocating that there's a good way to do this. We're not advocating it's the best way. We're just saying that taking a sledgehammer and doing something and then stopping it is not the way to do it, because then you create more problems that you had versus a planned approach that will always have problems, but it's significantly better than just stopping and telling a bunch of people you're not going to get what you thought you were going to get before.
Right. So it's like creating a first draft and then making changes along the way.
Yes.
Yes. And then eventually maybe you get a perfect one.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So just before we close it out, I had one question. So we've already painted the scenario. We know what the issue is. We know on its face that video showed that video that started this topic with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and I forget the other guy's name. But anyways, we painted on its face. It looked very sketchy. It didn't look like it was for the people. It didn't look like it benefited the people. But now we talked about it. Can we make the argument that the government only wants to pay for the research and have nothing to do with the marketing of the drug?
Well, there's multiple options here.
Yeah.
The government could put out money and say, we want to see development of this product, and now any product that comes out of it we expect that there'll be some price controls on what the cost can be. That's one option.
That's an option.
A second option could be that they're going to develop that money, and now, because they've given tax incentives and perhaps they've given money in order to develop the product, now they want to make sure that that product is made available to everybody, and that for that there will be some sort of a incremental cost. It'll be cost nothing or cheap to low-income people. It'll cost a little bit more to middle-income people. It'll cost a different, but it's a graded, tiered kind of approach. That's a second option. There's nothing that says that it has to follow any option, but it does say that if there is going to be money in development, then there should be some further thinking about how do you develop it and how do you control these costs, because these costs are getting astronomical. It's one thing where the cost of the drug was very expensive and people complained that it was expensive, but at least it was affordable. Now we've gone from it's costly and not affordable. Somehow we've got to find a way to do that, and that means that we've got to try any and all of these options in order to find some way to help people out.
And there's no one solution fits all, right?
No,
I mean, every situation has its different outcomes and different approaches, and it's a very interesting topic, and we would love to hear your thoughts and questions or comments on it, so please feel free to message us. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube. Please feel free to drop a comment, rate, review, all that's good stuff. We're on Apple Podcasts now, so give us a 5-star review, and I'm telling you to give a 5-star. No other stars are required. And also like, review, subscribe, and hit the little bell for notifications. Also visit ProPharmaConsultants.com, where you can find an endless stream of articles written by Dr. Craig Stern. Yes, he's written a lot of articles. Can you count them? Do you know?
It's I forget, over 140, I think. I don't know. It's a lot.
I'm pretty sure it's in the thousands. I'm pretty sure. You've been in the business a long time.
Thank you. I'm very young. Thank you.
Anyways, we hope you like the topic, and we hope to see you next week. Thanks for listening to this edition of ProPharma Talks. Just a little info about us. We are ProPharma Pharmaceutical Consultants Incorporated. We are a women-owned consulting firm that specializes in healthcare consulting and analytics. This week's featured product is ProPharma's Comprehensive Medication Review for Populations. It is an automated review of medication that is linked to billing, EMR, patients, and prescriber letters. CMR addresses the most significant issues with medication therapy. What is patient's therapeutic outcome? Are patient drug therapies effective? Are the patient's drugs therapy safe? For more information, visit ProPharmaConsultants.com or give us a call at 888-701-5438.